Hey, welcome to our podcast. Today, our House View podcast is with David Hodes, one of the co-founders of Hodes Weill. And actually, this is our second time of recording this because something happened. Our first time we did about a week ago was all about M&A and what's going on in the M&A business. Little Beknownst to me is that Hodes Weill was in the process of engaging its own M&A transaction. So I thought we'd kick it off by first talking a little bit about that, if you don't mind, David. What
Sure.
prompted you guys to decide to monetize your platform, and what was the objective, and how do you feel about what's happened, and how did it all come about?
Sure. Well, Jeff, always good to sit down and have a chat with you. We've, as you know, I was my head was sort of spinning as we were talking about generic M&A in the industry, knowing that everything I said had sort of a personal effect.
Yeah.
So I think we made a good decision to say, okay, now that there's news out there that is relevant, but not the reason we're on this call, I can speak a little bit more freely. So thanks for that. Let me just at one point I do want to make when you said you decided to monetize the platform. And to me, monetizing means you're selling something to somebody, and maybe you're going to hang around, maybe you're not going to hang around. But we were not looking to monetize the platform. We were looking for a way to realistically, as managers of a business, say, what has changed since we started this company in 2009, let alone the partnership that Doug and I began 26 plus years ago. And a few things came to mind. We've always had a global business, but global has gotten bigger and bigger and bigger every year. You can never be too global. What else has changed? The nature of the services that we provide have changed. Back in the old days, we were helping to, new managers to, form businesses, form vehicles, existing managers to diversify their vehicles. And it was a great business. But, when we reinvented ourselves in '09 as Hodes Weill, we recognized that the nature of our clients had changed. Many had become rather large companies, and they needed more traditional services, not just pure capital raising. And that was why we basically reinvented in 2009. So it was capital raising, advisory, restructuring, given it was kind of a difficult time in the market, and it was also what I would call proactive for forward planning. It could be M&A, it could be how you redefine the work that you do. Fast forward to today, we looked around the world and said it got bigger, which I've already commented on. The nature of services have continued to evolve. The role of technology also is so much more significant and important than it was. It was always part of it, but today, given the pace of change, the things you can do with AI that no one even considered 10 years ago. So part of what we were doing was, as hopefully responsible business managers, look around ourselves and say, are we positioned for the future or are we positioned for the past? And the conclusion, whether we liked it or not, was we had designed a great business, but the business and the needs of our clients had changed. And we need to think about how could we do it. We're a small business, but we were kind of becoming a big business, and that was difficult. So the real motivation was to put our business on a platform. We couldn't suddenly, grow a giant balance sheet to, be more global or afford the incredible costs of, this technology. But how do we find a platform that has a similar culture, values, focus on client solutions, where we could position our business for the next iteration?
So, some of the people listening in probably have heard of Chatham, but they may not know who they are and what they do. Can you put this into context, and where does the Hodes Weill business fit into Chatham and what they're trying to accomplish?
Sure, sure. Well, quite honestly, I've known of Chatham for about 30 years. Uh, Back then, we were creating some of the early international real estate funds, and working at Morgan Stanley, where we were going to have a fund that would invest across Europe and Asia, and by the way, and the UK, since it's its own currency. And the investors were interested, but they said, well, you realize we're going to give you dollars and we would like dollars in return. So Chatham, which began its business in the early 1990s, focusing more on the credit side, they were providing services for clients where interest rate caps, hedging, and then that evolved into a currency overlay. It's one thing if you make a single investment or you're in a single geography, but what Morgan Stanley was contemplating was we're going to be investing around the world, and so we have to have this kind of overall, kind of top-down overlay of, how we're going to manage all this currency exposure. And quite honestly, until about last year at this time, I thought that was the nature of Chatham's business. Chatham's business clearly evolved, and I was not that familiar with it. But as I began to understand it more and more, I first learned the scale of it was much, much bigger than I had thought, and that the services they were providing had, not surprisingly, evolved to meet more of the needs of their clients. And so they were becoming much more of an essential service provider across the entire credit stack of their clients, in addition to providing, all their traditional services of the hedging and especially, the currency. What I subsequently learned was they also had made a significant commitment to technology. And they are creating and have created subscription products and dashboards that really are providing their clients with what they need, which is clean, consistent data that they can get to in a very, very short, it's not quite push a button and it appears, but they're able to provide that kind of service where you can have clarity, transparency about what's in your portfolio. We looked at that and said, well, there's a million and one applications to what we do. I mean, we are effectively the equity side of the house now. Our business is, they said, you're at the front end, and if you're successful with the companies you work with, they will need the services we provide, at the other end. And the application of technology now, the kind of the data science and portfolio measurement tools that they are already applying on the credit side, we hope, well, maybe we can evolve that to provide the similar kind of clarity and transparency on the equity side. And we've been at this a long time. What's been the punchline to what's your biggest concern? And most LPs say, I don't know that the data I have across my entire portfolio is consistent, and I don't always know on any given day what are my exposures. We felt that it's certainly worth making the effort to help. Can we figure this out? Because that's what we know our clients want. In practical terms, I'd like to start with maybe the most important one. From a culture and value and business mission perspective, it was like I had met some long lost friends. They're nice people. They had a view that we could kind of help complete the picture there. They don't have a business that does what we do. They have an advisory business, but it's different than the advisory that we see. So we saw
more of a consulting business.
Well, they're advising, but more on the credit side.
Okay.
They're helping clients arrange credit, but it's different. They don't have an M&A business. They often are participants in the workout and restructuring, but these are things that we do as our it's kind of core to our advisory business. It was important to us that there wasn't how do I say this? They wanted the business to all come over intact. So much M&A, and we'll get into M&A, are there synergies? And I like to focus on revenue synergies, not expense synergies. And this was really not about, how do we downsize, right size, fit it into our existing businesses. Without even asking, they said, makes complete sense. We should continue to have you operate as Hodes Weill. You're well known for what you do around the world. And a lot of people are still learning, what the Chatham business is. And while we didn't ask for that, it was certainly an important and helpful way to continue growing the business. And at the end of the day, and I've had a lot of M&A clients who've said, it comes down to culture and values. And I've always said, I agree. But now that I was, as they say, performing surgery on myself, it became so clear to me as other groups would have conversations with us that the chemistry and the culture that we brought together has been, as we've introduced teams, and it's been way beyond our expectations of how similar we are, even though we're, a tenth the size.
So what did you learn through this whole process, David, that's going to help you do a better job of advising clients on M&A? Because it's one thing to think about it theoretically, it's another thing to actually go through
Eh,
it. So,
Well, yeah, and we've had a lot of, oh, you're going to eat your own cooking for a change. And it's a great question, Jeff. Uh, I think the point I just made, how critical culture and values, and you have to like these people. You have to be yourself with them from the beginning, because you don't want to suddenly find out. And I think it's on both sides. You don't want to find out, 3 months in, oh, well, that's kind of what they were saying, but is that really what they were doing? And I'd say that the importance of culture and values, especially as you are communicating it to your team, they can tell. And we share this news obviously with our team, and they share our enthusiasm in part because they see the chemistry when the groups were together. They know us well enough to know, we wouldn't be behaving this way. We wouldn't have this kind of level of emotion and camaraderie if it wasn't genuine. I would also say that it forces you to look at your business in a way that you probably don't look at on a day-to-day basis. Now you're looking at it from the perspective of an outsider who knows about you, but they don't know how you do what you do, and kind of how you communicate that, how you position it, and be thinking ahead. How does this fit into their world? And as I said earlier, some of the potential synergies in the future, they're about providing essential services to their clients. We have always felt we're providing one of the most essential services. As you know, real estate consumes vast amount of capital. And if we are able to help our clients grow, what an important position that is, because without that, the machinery slows down. So we kind of collectively said, we focus on how we solve problems for our clients, and that makes us hopefully essential to what they do. I would also say, and since we are gentlemen of a similar age cohort, you often think about how does a business like this transition and live beyond its founders. And while I'm perfectly healthy and not going anywhere, I learned that next year I will be older, not younger. And it wasn't that I had to do anything immediate. I'm blessed with a partner who's quite a bit younger, but it was more about how do we transition a business really to outlive, whatever, transition beyond just the founders. And it does. What did I learn? I learned that I had to accept that someday I may not walk this planet, and I pushed that off to the back. But it's not like a totally selfless act of, oh, I'll sell the company for the benefit of others. I was really focused, and I think we hear this from more and more of our M&A clients. It's I don't know if it's legacy. I certainly feel a responsibility to all the people here who work so hard, that this business needs to go on when I'm not here anymore. And I think we have found miraculously a partner who shares our views, our vision, our culture, and our values, where this business can now thrive. And somebody will say, oh, you know are you happy? And I said, I'm delighted. There's, when you are worried, it's a little bit, I don't want to say, it's a little like your kids. I mean, every day you want to make sure they're okay. And are they going to be okay when I'm not here to worry about them? And I'll still worry, of course, but it's sort of lifted this concern that, there's people who sit outside that door who work so hard. And I want to make sure that their career opportunity is enhanced by this. And I think that we also, kind of check that box. And these were things that you sort of knew, but until you feel it personally, it had a different resonance.
now you mentioned culture as an important contributor to this whole decision to move with Chatham. How would you define the culture at Hodes Weill? What is it?
Yeah. Well, I'll tell you what we always say. First of all, family first. And that may sound like an odd place to start, but we've always felt, we don't have employees, we have human people, colleagues that don't just exist between the hours that they're in our offices. So, when it comes down to critical things, if you have to make a decision, it's focus on your family. And we heard a very similar message from our friends at Chatham. So I would say first and foremost, that is, we are whole people. Second, clients come next. And I don't mean that in, when we're done, going to our kids' birthday parties, we'll do the work for you. We focus on the client, and are we providing the right solution for them? And that is very much how Chatham has positioned itself, and I think it was an important part of the culture. I've worked at organizations that I would say are more product driven than solutions driven, and these are kind of business school buzzwords, but at the end of the day, our best outcome is that we have solved a problem for our clients, whether it's capital, restructuring, and M&A, whatever it is. That's the goal. Not are we selling them the product that we think makes the most sense. It's interesting when we get together as Hodes Weill as a group, and we bring in people from all our offices. It's like old friends getting together. And when we have now joined some of Chatham's, group things, it was the same thing. And we like one another, we respect one another, we do not allow disrespect to kind of creep in at the edges. And everyone has a voice, and everyone can share their opinions. Of course, we work hard. They work hard. It may sound, well, how do you balance all that? That's always the trick in life, isn't it? And how do you balance the rigors of a challenging job in a market that changes by the day, while also maintaining that balance? And they certainly met us in that regard. Two other things that weren't immediately apparent. When Chatham began its business in the early 90s, there was no real industry around what they do. And they have helped to frame an industry. And they have continued to iterate and evolve over the last 30 years. I think that we felt a very similar dynamic. We didn't invent the private fund world, but when we set up a predecessor business now 25 years ago, at the front end of this expansion, we really focused on how do we not just do this for the benefit of us, but how do we create an industry with standards and transparency and structure, and focus on quality and actually generating the results that the investors are hoping for. And we have the benefit over the last 25 years to have played, I'd say, an important role in helping the industry grow and evolve. And so we looked at it as, well, they're a lot like us, only a whole lot bigger. They have not just said, this is our business and this is what we do, and you just keep doing it. It was a little bit more of a understanding that they continued to respond to what their clients needed over the years. And in that, they've helped really expand and frame an industry. And that's kind of how we want to think about ourselves too.
Okay. Well, we could talk the whole session about the transaction, but that's a good color to segue into talking a little bit about the broader M&A business, which has become an important part of what Hodes Weill is doing, and some of your competitors as well. So what is going on in the M&A business? What's driving it? Why is this happening right now?
Yeah, well, look, as you know, M&A has been, part of our industry for a very, very long time. I worked at a firm in the early 90s called the Yarmouth Group, and we were acquired by Lend-Lease. So, companies that are selling are looking for many of the things I was talking about. You need to reinvent it a little bit to address, what are the issues and needs of the market today, not yesterday. There are acquiring companies that either have businesses that they want to amplify, or they don't have exposure to the industry, and they want to bolt on vehicles that will help them have a greater breadth of conversation with their LPs. In the last 20 or so years, there's also been this new asset class, which is taking minority stakes in growing fund management businesses, and that in itself is an asset class. It has very attractive income characteristics. It solves a finance solution for the general partners who need growth capital but don't want to sell the business. And you can create a great alignment with those sorts of structures where, if the stake buyer has $1 of exposure and the management team has $4 of exposure, you're aligned because they want to grow all $5. So the M&A practice, though, I think also over the last couple of years has looked kind of head on into the challenges of capital raising. And most M&A is not about capital raising, but over the last few years, it has been. Can I get greater global reach through distribution channels that may exist at another company? Can this acquiring company provide us with capital so that we can expand to establish new product lines, new investment strategies? And oftentimes that involves selling a stake in the business, so you get capital on the balance sheet, but you also have investable, more LP type capital. Some companies that are doing the acquisitions look and say it is easier, more cost effective, and quicker to acquire a business, and this would typically mean more full-on control sales, than to go out and build one and raise all that capital. Again, giving the challenges of raising capital in the recent environment. So, by the numbers, M&A is up dramatically year over year. I think that 2025 was probably, between real estate and real assets, the most strategic trades in a year, maybe ever. I don't have all the numbers in front of me. And it spanned selling full-on control, partial stakes. Some of it looks a little bit more like just helping the GPs finance their activity going forward. I also think, it's not lost on anyone that, we announced a strategic alliance, an acquisition last week. This week, another very large and high-quality firm called Campbell Lutyens has announced its acquisition by Lazard. As I was reading their material, it sounded, very similar. So I think we're all, us small and mid-sized businesses are facing the same things. The challenges of being global when you're not at that level of scale, whether it's for distribution purposes or even just the cost of regulatory compliance. And then you layer in the costs of technology, and I think a lot of firms are saying, there is going to be a greater opportunity if we are on a larger, more scaled platform.
Well, the one thing all of these firms have in common is that they're all there to serve the interests of institutional investors and private wealth clients. So what's in it for them? I mean, how does this benefit them when these firms are merging? And isn't there some risk? I mean, you mentioned culture, and that's really important. But oftentimes, what looks like a good match on the surface turns out to not be a very good match in the long run. And we've seen this happen time and again with mergers that really haven't worked out to that, or at least they haven't been accretive to either party.
Yes and yes. A little funny anecdote, and no bad will intended to anyone. But when I was at Yarmouth, it was a group that a lot of the senior leadership was English, and what we went off and found an Australian company to buy us. And if you know the history between England and Australia, it wasn't always one of a comparable culture. But I only understood that in hindsight years later. There are many acquisitions of fund management firms that don't go as planned. Absolutely. And oftentimes it's a mismatch between cultures. Sometimes the focus can shift from generating the best results for your LPs to having to grow at a pace that maybe is inconsistent with that. And no one sets out to do that, but sometimes that is one of the unintended consequences. One of the reasons the manager stakes business has grown is that it is an opportunity to bring capital into your business and and disturb the main enterprise as little as possible. We spoke with one of our clients who did sell a stake, and we were asking, how's it going? And he says, it's great. I haven't heard from him in 6 months. So when you start to understand that you can bring capital into the business and not change things, that is going to be more of a hallmark of success. if you are selling a business and it's going to be fully integrated and suddenly you're losing I don't want to say control, but well-defined processes that you've had before suddenly start to look different because of how other organizations work. Oftentimes other people are put into the business from the company, not to keep an eye on you, but to enhance that integration. If you start have the pressure on you, well, now you need to cross-sell products. That can often take your eye off the main event, which is focusing on delivering the results to your clients. I can point to many, many acquisitions, though, where it did exactly what it wanted to do. And it has created immense opportunity because now, the manager that may have felt subscale is, I don't want to say liberated, but able to focus on the business more and not on, the entrepreneur's risk is always you got to make payroll. And not to say you're not focusing on the economics of the business, but I can speak personally, it's always there, right in the back of your head. There was somebody said early on, if all you do is focus on making payroll, all you'll ever do is make payroll. So you can't just be thinking short term. But even when you think as a manager of a business that you're making good long-term decisions, you still have to focus on the near-term reality of, can we afford it? And again, I'll come back to technology, and I don't care how big a company you are, everyone's asking that same question about technology. Can we afford it?
And it's changing so fast, it's hard to keep pace with it all. Circling back to the question I asked earlier, which is what's in it for the investor? How does this benefit? Assuming it works, right? Doesn't always work, but assuming it does work, how does the investor benefit from these?
Well, I think if it creates more stability to the team, and I mean that not just everybody stays in their place, but it also creates a suitable kind of transition of senior leadership to a more resilient, diversified platform. And what does that mean? Well, our the modern industry of private funds, you could say, is 30 years old, 20 years, whatever it is. Again, my old point, we get older every year. A lot of the managers of these businesses are at the point where they're thinking about, can I and should I be, a key person for another 10 years? Is that right? But it's often difficult to transition these businesses in a vacuum. And I know as a manager, the last thing I wanted to do was become a large mortgage note on my company, holding them back. Everybody's working so hard. The rewards should go to them, not to, pay off, me, because now I decided I want to go, whatever it is I'm going to do. And by the way, I'm not going anywhere. So I think it can create more stability, resiliency, and greater access to resources. And done right, that is what is in it for the LPs. Because what's their concern? It's always so interesting to me. If a public company only had key persons and no visible, identifiable transition plan, that's not good if you're a public company. In the private market, understanding, it's illiquid, so we want to make sure that people doing the work now are going to be here to, see it all the way through. Excuse me. But that being said, you still have to have a plan of succession, and that is often more easily facilitated in the context of a larger company. Excuse me.
Let's say I'm an investment manager and I'm thinking about selling either their stake or selling the company for some strategic reason, similar to the ones that you've articulated. What are some things I really need to be thinking about? And how long should I expect to give to the process to go through it? Because it doesn't happen overnight, right?
No, it
And,
doesn't. And my
and
partners will, yeah,
what are some of the pitfalls? What are the things you got to really watch?
sure. Well, right around when I turned 60, my partners will tell you, I said, I need a 5-year plan. I don't know, I picked it out of the air. I turned 65, I need a 5-year plan. I turned 67, I need a 5-year plan. So what's one of the pitfalls? Again, I come back to that earlier point about mortality. The years creep up on you. So you have to think about this, and this takes some planning. And I think a lot of what I have seen is a little bit what I was sort of facing a few years ago as well. That's interesting, but I can't think about the fact that someday I'm gonna, maybe not be, part of this great adventure here. So you need to think about this long term. Other pitfalls. Sometimes you get knocks on your doors. Hey, you should sell your business to us. Here's it's going to be great. And we've had knocks on the door over the years, and it's always nice. It's always flattering. Have a conversation, see what they have in mind. It always seemed a little off center, honestly. Um, and then over the past couple of years, as I think M&A has increased, for the service business, not just for the managers, but it's true across both. You can often kind of go down a path with a party because they knocked on your door and it all got interesting. And I'm not saying that you can't just have sort of a bilateral negotiation, but I think it's very important to step back and say, what am I comparing this to? You can't make a decision like that in a vacuum. And quite honestly, we were kind of making a little bit of that judgment at one point too, and that's when we felt, and I mean we, all the partners said we need to step back and think about what are we solving for here, and what makes the most sense, not just who's kind of turned our head with an interesting proposition. It may sound odd that as an M&A advisor, we also said we need to bring in an advisor to help us at a certain point. And we did. We knew them well. It was an individual at Piper Sandler. We had known him over the years. We realized that for a decision like this, you need the benefit of an external party to help you kind of tease through it, because they will see it in a different context than you will. Now, I am not saying anytime you do anything, call someone like me or someone else, hire an advisor. Yeah, you should, but to me, it wasn't to make the advisors happy. It was really to make sure that you have thought about it from the outside looking in, not just the prism of your own kind of vision of what you're trying to achieve. Or as a friend said, so you didn't want to perform surgery on yourself. And that was, I thought, a very good metaphor for this. Look, there's lots of pitfalls. Sometimes people say, oh, the culture's great, but they love the economics. And so they kind of blended the two in their mind and maybe focused more on the economics than the real culture. Uh, Last point, and this is not insignificant. When you are, as an owner, selling a service business, a people business, there's a few obligations. One is that the senior people understand you need to commit to this business. They are buying people, and as the leaders of a business, you need to expect and anticipate and look forward to participation in what this next iteration looks like. And that earlier point about, well, sometimes people let this go too long, you have to put into your consideration a service requirement that is going to maybe extend out your attachment to the business. Personally, I'm excited about this because it's a new chapter. It's doing what we do, or taking what we have and kind of thinking about it in a different way. I will tell you, there were a lot of our friends in the industry. Hey, great job, great exit, and I keep reminding them, this is not an exit, and this is the next chapter. And I think as a manager of a people business, that's how you need to think about it as you approach something like this.
In a way, it's kind of a recapitalization, is it not?
Well, we're calling it 2.0, or so in the current jargon. It's not just the recapitalization. That to me kind of implies the economics. I mean, certainly having more resources and a stronger balance sheet that can afford some of the things we were talking about. That's certainly a relief, and that we're not going to suddenly become flagrant spenders, because that's just not kind of how we think about it. But having more resources is, I guess, a recapitalization. I look at it as we're going to learn a lot from a company that is characterized by amazing best practices. I hope we give back as good as we get, but we're going to learn different things. We're going to learn other aspects of the industry where they are dominant. And we can think about, just like how we provide our basic services in a different way. And that to me is exciting.
Okay, well, this doesn't have to be the last time we talk about M&A. Interesting topic, and lots of people are interested in it. But we are coming up on 40 minutes, and I don't want to take too long on this. Um, if you wanted to lead people with one thing to think about with respect to M&A activity or engineering a merger of some kind, whether you be a buyer or a seller,
Yeah,
what?
it's one thing. You know me, I speak in paragraphs. Uh, there's this old saying: the only constant is change. You have to embrace it, and I know that is like such a cliche. For a while I was thinking, oh gosh, if we sell the company, is that going to be someone saying, oh, admission of failure? They couldn't do it alone, and I had to understand that there's no one who's going to think that unless that's what you say. And so it was only maybe some dark thoughts here, like how is this going to come across? I think you have to embrace the change. You have to embrace the fact that if you've built a company, and I think I'll be, I'll boast. I think we've built a great company, and the best thing we can do with it is evolve it to be kind of suitable and appropriate and focused for the future. And what a shame it would be if we built a great company and we were, I don't know, stubborn, blind, ego in the way, whatever it was, and said, we like the way we do it. We'll just keep doing it. And I always say, I don't want to be the dinosaur wearing polar fleece. I want to evolve. And so I think that to me is understand it's going to change. And having been involved as an employee when companies have been acquired, embrace the change, embrace the integration. Don't look at the new colleagues as others. Look at them as us. And what can we learn from them? What can we share with them? And really try to make this, the 1 + 1 = 3, which everyone always talks about.
Well, David, thank you for your time today. It's really been fun catching up and chatting as always. And we're looking forward to the next edition of House View.
Well, thank you so much, Jeff. I mean, having a fireside chat with you is just so enjoyable. I guess we've been at it a couple of decades, so always looking forward to the next.
Yeah, it's always fun. Take care.
All right, thank you. Yep, bye bye.
And thank you, everybody, for tuning in. We appreciate it.